Hi, it's good to see you again. We've been talking about the circuit of culture, and in this session, we're going to be focusing on consumption. We'll examine the active role of audience, of consumers in the process of meaning creation, and then we'll see how it affects public relations practice. The idea of consumers as active meaning makers is quite new. I and you, we all have been taught to think about public relations and communication in the context of a linear transmission model, such as Laswell's who says what in which channel, to whom, with what effect. And other models that we use in public relations like Race or Rope, they kind of reinforce our understanding of communication as a linear process. But then some people say, wait, you know what? It looks like we're missing something here. In some cases, we get the intended effect, and in others, we don't. Does it really depend on the message and on the medium alone? What about the receivers? What they do with the message? Maybe there is something about the receivers, the audience, that in part determines whether our communication would succeed or fail. One way to think about it, proposed by Bourdieu, was that we consume messages probably according to who we are, because consumption is the prime indicator of our social class. For example, if you don't make enough money to buy a Bentley, then there is no way for you to buy a Bentley. Or vice versa. If you make enough money to buy a Bentley, why would you drive an old Corolla? It kind of makes sense, but it doesn't take into account so many things like, let's say, what if you wanted to get a Bentley so bad that you had been saving money for all your life to buy one? Or what if you had become a billionaire but you still like driving your old Corolla? In response to such criticism of that approach, other researchers suggested that maybe we become what we consume, and maybe meaning resides not in the object, but in the way how that object is being consumed. In other words, using the Bentley example, in the end of the day, Bentley is just a car, and we and maybe our social group, we attach certain characteristics to those who drive Bentleys. And when we buy that car for ourselves, we begin to think of ourselves as of Bentley drivers, whatever it means to us. But again, there is a problem here. After all, if Bentley is just a car, then why is it so expensive? Why is interior and exterior looks the way it looks? Although this approach fully empowers consumers, it completely downplays the role of production in the process of meaning creation. And the circuit of culture sort of balances these two approaches, acknowledging the role of both production and consumption in the process of meaning creation. Practitioners encode campaign messages with a possible range of meanings, and audience interpret those messages in the context of their own life experience, their demographics, their psychographics, and as a result, meanings other than dominant, the one that were intended by practitioners, those meanings just may emerge. As we can see, consumption and production are not the opposite ends of the communication process. Rather, they are its overlapping parts. And consumers are active meaning makers. They decode our messages through the prism of their own value system and their background, and encode a new meaning to our product while using it. Therefore, a moment of production is never really fully realized until the moment of consumption. Consumption is, in fact, it feeds new meanings back into campaigns, and it's not the end of the process but the beginning of another, and thus itself a form of production. And it's very important for us to timely receive that kind of feedback and be ready to respond it. By the way, companies often use it to their advantage. That's, for example, eyebrow shadow kits. Girls are probably know what I'm talking about. So those kits were invented because beauty corporations realized that women use regular eyeshadows to darken their eyebrows. So, active nature. Once we acknowledge the active nature of our audience, it does change our approach to practice. First, it becomes extremely important to monitor how audience decodes and interprets our messages. That means ongoing research, the research that just doesn't stop at some point. The rope and race models assume that we evaluate the impact of our campaign after its implementation, and that's it. But precisely because audience is an active participant in the process of meaning production, we need to continue research to understand what new meanings appear and why they appear and how we can make use of them. In PR research, we often use surveys, but surveys only give us an incomplete picture and they never answer the question why. For this reason, it is important for us to use more ethnographic methods such as focus groups, in-depth interviews, or participant observation. Another thing we need to keep in mind about the moment of consumption is that it is influenced by regulation. Typically, corporations have more power than consumers to define what product will be produced or how it will look like. But when some norms such as legal or cultural or moral are violated, consumers feel empowered enough to act, and they do it by boycotting products or protesting against organizations. And of course, we don't want it to happen to us. But if you think, how do we do this? We need to be able to do the environmental scanning, and therefore we should take issues management approach. Before you even begin, you want to start to at least anticipate some of the possible issues that may arise. And then you want to develop some positions on those issues that you think might surface. Then we need to make sure that we identified some of the key audiences whose support is really important and the desired behaviors of those audiences. What would you like them to do to support your cause? So the whole point of issues management is that you need to take all those steps before you begin communication. When we talk about the moment of consumption, the research is here has to be deeper than it usually is in the issues management, because we need to identify those very subtle and very fluid meanings, and we want to identify them as soon as they emerge. And the best way to do that would be using ethnographic research. When we are doing focus groups, when we are conducting in-depth interviews or observing behavior, it is that really close monitoring. It's not just a general snapshot of what's going on at the moment. So ethnographic methods do work best in those kinds of situations when you need to get real deep insight. What happens if we don't do it? If we don't listen to our audience before we communicate with them? Remember that Coca-Cola Pepsi story. When people feel that their norms have been violated, they will speak up and they are not going to be quiet. Particularly true today with the availability of the internet. Their feedback is going to be loud and clear, and there is often where their communication programs fail if we don't monitor it all along the way. In our previous sessions, we've talked about globalization already, and we talked about it in the context of production, and we said that global corporations tailor their products to meet local consumer demand. But globalization is something that occurs not only at will of corporations. Consumers also participate in this process. There's the term global consumption. What that means is that the same text or products are interpreted in many different ways, but by many different people who bring their own ideas about those products or texts to the table. And when consumption of those new products becomes institutionalized through media and markets, consumers appropriate those products and ideas in localized way, and it results in globalization. That's it for now. We'll continue talking about the circuit of culture very soon. See you later.